Hey everybody, Todd McFarlane here. You're watching Tantrums and Tabletop website here. Coolest place to be. Stay tuned.
Okay, let's do it. Let's get into it. So we're here to talk about Spawn 350, Spawn issue 350. I'm sure every interview you've done about this book has begun with that kind of like wow factor, 350 issues. So my first question is twofold.
I've got my employee only cover, but yes, this is issue 350 right here. Boom, right here. Inside is issue 350. Yep.
So there's two things you've shown me there. First off, an employee only cover. Now that blows my mind because I did not know that existed. So even though the clue's in the title, employee only, are you strictly limiting those books to McFarlane employees only?
Yep.
No.
Yeah, I've done it over the years. What I end up doing is I've done it over the years before, and then I sign it to their name, right, whoever the employee name is, and then I put my signature on it, and then it's theirs to do with as they wish. So theoretically, could they sell it? Yeah, but you're going to put to Fred. You're going to get to Fred, and then I'll know who sold it. It was Fred. But in all honesty, I don't even care if they sell it. It's their book. Once you give a gift to somebody, you don't have any control over it. People are allowed to do whatever they want. They can even regift it. So I don't know. We'll see. But sometimes it's just nice for me to sort of do something for the employees across, all the companies that I have to just go here. I'll give you something nobody else has got. Do with it as you wish. So.
That's awesome. Have you got any employees who have been with you, if not since
comic
day one?
book fans? Yeah. Do you have any that are not comic book fans, and do you want their addresses? Is that the question?
That's it. Yeah, I'll make them a good offer. No. So thinking back to all the employee exclusive covers and gifts that you've given away, have you got anybody in any of the McFarlane companies who maybe has all the gifts, who's been with you since kind of day one, or at least gift one?
Yeah, there should be a couple. I've got a couple people who've been with me for, decades. So yeah, there would be a couple completists. So if you can run those people down, they'd have them all. I assume they have them all. I don't know what they've done to them. Maybe they gave them to their kids. Who knows? But yeah, somebody would, because sometimes we've done little statues, right, and little toys and stuff like that. So it's not always comic books, right? Okay. We just sort of pick different things over the years. So
that's really cool. Can you show us the cover again? Who did the art on the cover?
So what we ended up doing was it was Brett Booth. Mm-hmm. Brett Booth, who's the artist on the inside of the book. So we just took a page, from some art that he had done, and just said, "Hey, that'd make a cool cover, right?" And put it up. So, yeah.
And that leads me,
because Brett Booth was doing Gunslinger, and he's moving over to Spawn, and then Carlo Barbary, who was doing Spawn, is coming over to Gunslinger with me.
Okay.
And so we're just going to swap. Sometimes it's I think it's prudent to, because both of them have been doing both their books for a long time, right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's just nice to sort of stretch your artistic wings a little bit by, changing it up a bit. So now Brett had never really done Spawn himself. And, over the years he said, "Hey, Tom, can you bring Spawn in the Gunslinger book?" And Carlo had given me a good run on the Spawn side, almost probably close to 40 issues or so. And it was just like, hey, how do I keep them both excited? And it's like, why don't we just sort of swap characters, and they can sort of recalculate what it is that they're doing and think about their page layout slightly differently. So I know how I know how that was when I was doing it myself. that sometimes, it's the old proverb in pro sports of, sometimes the player just needs to get traded and get a new fresh start, right? And new juices, especially creatively, come to the forefront, because they have to think of the character differently. Like if you're drawing the Hulk and then all of a sudden you move over to Iron Man, that's a completely different mindset, I think, creatively, of how you're drawing that book. So,
and that leads me to the second thing that blew my mind, which was Brett Booth, whose work I've been familiar with since way back in the Wildstorm days, Backlash, and all that kind of great stuff. Obviously, he's been doing Gunslinger for a good while now, coming across to the main Spawn title with issue 350. What was it about Brett's art that made him perfect, initially for Gunslinger and now for Spawn? What was it that attracted you to his work?
I look at each one of the artists as their own individuals, and I try not to do any comparisons to each other, right? I think that, Javi Fernandez does some beautiful work on King Spawn, and then Steven Segovia on Scorch. So between Carlo and Steven and Brett and Javi, they each sort of have their own interesting style. Of the four, I would say that Javi is probably the most stylized, which is why I tried to convince him to go on King Spawn, because I wanted to make that book a little bit more of like a horror book. And I thought his artwork is really sort of like moody and has that sort of creepy factor to it. I would say that Brett, Booth and Segovia and Barbary, they all are a little bit more traditional superhero looks, right? I mean, I'd put them in a little bit of the same category and bucket that I was in. But they're all capable, which is amazing, because I was never good at this. They're all capable of actually doing a lot of people, right? I mean, doing a team book like Segovia has done, that's very hard. I think Brett Booth and Barbary could do it. As a matter of fact, there are a lot of stories in both of those titles, Gunslinger and Spawn, that felt kind of like team books anyways. There's so many characters in there. It was one of the reasons why we expanded to doing more than just the Spawn book, so that I could move some of these characters out. But I don't know. I think they all have what you need in superhero comic books, which is when the moment comes, you have to be able to do big Broadway acting, right? This is just Jack Kirby storytelling. It's got to be big, it's got to be bold, and it just has to feel energetic. And then the true stars are also the ones that you can give a quiet scene, and it also looks interesting. Not obviously not as good as the 2-page explosion, right? I mean, that's not a comparison, but you can still have a page of people talking, and it's kind of fun to still look at, because then the pressure isn't always then that you have to carry it all with the word balloons. And so the more storytelling I get out of my artist, at least when I'm writing, the less I feel like I have to say something, right? If they're telling the story, sometimes the best thing to do is just get out of the way, right? I mean, we've got a new book coming out, Sam and Twitch, that I'm writing, and I think the first 3 pages or so has 1 or 2 captions or balloons on it or something. Like, I just go, no. And there's probably 25 panels, but I just go, I don't need to say anything. It's like, it's all there. What am I going to say? What am I going to add that isn't already self-evident? And by the way, in that book, I'm trying to see if I can't do it. I wanted the artist to draw it like it was like a movie, and then I wanted the artist to color it like it was a movie. So I go, I don't know. Well, maybe I should write it like it was a movie. And if it was a movie and I was directing it, I wouldn't be saying anything right now. So why should I put a caption saying it's a cold, rainy night, right? So you can see it. It's raining and it's cold. So,
and has the artist for Sam and Twitch been announced?
Yeah, it's a gentleman who worked on Spawn. He drew Spawn 201 to 250, Shimon Kodransky.
Okay.
And he's gone on and done a bunch of other great stuff. But years ago, we had this idea we put together, and we started it, and it's sort of been finished for a while and sitting on the shelf, but it's finally going to see daylight. And again, it's a book. It's a book that if you don't like superhero, I think you can pick it up. And if you don't care one iota about Spawn, I think you can still pick it up. It's going to be a true detective book, right? I mean, these two characters, although Sam and Twitch have been around since Spawn issue number 1, every now and then they sort of bump into Spawn, right, in the mythology. But let's say that's 5 times a year, right? The other 360 days, they're great detectives and they do their day job. And so that book is them basically showing you what they're doing in between those bumps, which is solving crime. So
cool. I look forward to it. And that's coming out, Sam and Twitch is due out
in March. Yeah,
awesome.
Next month. Yeah, I just sent the first half of the script, and so I owe my letter the second half here in the next couple of days. Yep.
Wow.
So I'm quite proud of it. I'm going to show it off here a lot in the next week on my social channel and stuff. As a book, like we got a bunch of books coming out this year, and one of the things that I want, and it was one of the reasons why we started with Sam and Twitch, was to let people know that it wasn't just going to be more Spawn-ish comic books, right? Okay. I've got 4 of those. So I want to say, hey, I don't expect anybody to collect all the titles we put out, but my job should be to put out quality product at a fair price, and more importantly, give you a variety, right? A diversity of stuff. So if you want crime, we've got it. We've got one coming out that's heavily bent on sci-fi. We've got one that's more of sort of dark fantasy. We've got one that's, sort of fun and goofy if you like satire and comedy. Again, do they all tangentially sort of touch the Spawn universe? Yes. But it's no different than what Marvel and DC doing if you take the 2 extremes, right? You can find the 2 extremes, right? You can get everything from some dark, moody Punisher story all the way to Peter Porker, the Spider-Ham, right? So I'm just trying to create that bandwidth and then let people pick what they want.
Cool. I'll look forward to it. So Spawn 350, you know 350 is coming up. What's your objective with that milestone coming up? Given that you've got, you're the only independent creator who's got 350 issues of a comic book behind him and 350 issues of storytelling. What was your objective coming up to that milestone? What story-wise, creatively?
Well, one, just on sort of behind the scenes, just to remind ourselves that we got another 50 to get to 400. So we're only at the halfway point, but it seems like it wasn't that long ago we were talking about 300. So we're already sort of halfway up the mountain to get to the next anniversary book. But as you can imagine, when you do, this many issues, there are, I think, probably literally at least 100 threads that have been mentioned throughout the span of those 350 issues that when I do the writing, I do them as throwaways, right? But I'm aware that I said it, right? That somebody said something that if a writer wanted to pull that thread, could literally do, I think, a big story on it. Right. And so the one that's been dangling for a while is that in issue number 100, the Spawn killed his maker, Malbolgia. And Malbolgia was sort of the king of that realm, right? He's not like sort of the devil. He's just like one of many, but he's on he was the king of his realm. But when he killed them, then that sort of king of hell, there was an empty throne. And for 250 issues, the throne's been empty. Have there been scrums? And have I mentioned it off and on in the last 250 issues between 100 and today. Yeah, if you were paying attention, right? Every now and then I say it. Hey, the throne's been abdicated. The throne's empty. But again, I didn't make any sort of big focus on it. But then we decided as we were coming towards issue 350 to make that our focal point. And a couple of the villains have discovered that if you sit on the throne, your powers get augmented. That changes the whole ballgame, because now it's like, okay, so I'm the king of hell. I've got a whole army I can then send and beat my enemies. But what if I was actually stronger than my enemies? Right now I'm not, but if I sit there, I actually get moved up on the rankings. So there's a bit of a scrum going on by 3 or 4 factions, including Spawn himself, of who's gonna get there and who's gonna sit upon the throne. And then you get that answer in 350. You get the answer. Boom. You don't have to have read I keep saying, you don't have to have read the previous 250 issues. You just have to understand that's the concept. Mm-hmm. That the throne has been abdicated, and 350 will give you the answer of somebody finally sitting on the throne. So I think it's worth getting that answer. And then ... there's an epilogue chapter that Carlo Barberi does. And he shows that story shows some of the impact of what that person sitting on the throne means to Earth. There's again, it's not 100% because of their actions. There's all these other things that have been happening for the last 100 issues, off and on, that combined causes an after effect. And that's what we'll be dealing with, starting with issue 351, and it will impact all my other books, right? I've got Gunslinger, King Spawn, and Scorched, and Spawn, the OG. It will impact all of them. Not in a crossover way, not in an event way. It's just that the effect in that one book is applied and will have the exact same effect in all the books. So that people then who might come on because they were a lapsed reader or curious or a first-time reader will then go, oh, I'm sort of getting in on the ground level of this new thing that's happening. And this is sort of curious. We'll see how this all plays out. So
interesting times. How far?
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see if they go for the ride, right? You're always like having an idea and having a theory, making it a successful reality. That sometimes those can be two different things.
How far ahead are you plotting the book? Have you got sort of a massive story ideas and a notebook? And you think, okay, well, when I get to 380, I'll cover this storyline. Are you going issue by issue?
No, I'd say it's somewhere in between. I don't. For me, I'm probably the worst of the bunch of the writers that I have. I don't think that far in advance. Sometimes I am not only book to book, but sometimes page to page. But I know what those scenes and those stories are against the bigger backdrop. I know what the bigger backdrop is. So everything is always in conjunction with that big umbrella that I know is always up over my head. So as long as everything's moving in that direction, the details of how you get there, I think at times are less relevant. So I know that we have conversations, John Lehman and Roy McConville and myself and my editor, Thomas Ely, they're always talking, and then every now and then I jump in on it and I just verbal vomit because I've got this whole volume of information, as you can imagine, of sort of the Spawn universe and the potential of going in different directions. And we just talk those things out. And as you can imagine, when you have a brainstorming session, new ideas or new directions or new priorities, I would say, sort of come up and we go, oh yeah, let's pull that thread here for the next 5 or 6 months, right? On this book, I'll take that thread. I'll take that book thread in my book, right? And you pull it. And then everybody's either aware of that or they go, hey, you know what? Maybe I can help build upon that a little bit in my book, and at least acknowledge, or them even saying something that indicates that all these people are sort of playing in the same sandbox.
Cool. What does issue 350 mean to you? What does the milestone mean? What does the event mean? What when you think, okay, issue 350, what, as the creator of this?
Russell, in the simplest form, it just means I've just been around a long time, right? You don't get 350 issues. I mean, that's 30 years of your life, right? So it means time. So again, there's two things that are valuable about time. One is that if you can last in any occupation that you choose for 30 years, call it a victory, right? And that's just on Spawn. Remember, I used to work at Marvel and DC prior to that. So you go, wow, I guess I've been doing this a long time. Not a bad career. Two, that we're at 350 and it'd probably be the number one selling book in our industry when, you know, for the month. So not only is 3+ decades gone by and I've had a long career, but you've had a long career and it's still relevant. Some of the stuff you do is still relevant, right? I mean, again, not everything, but 350, it's a moment. People, I think, should sort of be curious and pay attention to it a little bit. So you go, wow, we've gone all this way, and at times it still matters, right? You don't want to create in a vacuum, because that's not really sort of good for all of our fragile artistic egos that we all have. So you're going, okay, not bad, right? And then it poses the question: can you do it for another 350? Right? You're like, is this only the halfway point? We'll see. We'll see where it all goes. So I don't plan on ending it anytime soon. I plan on hanging around on this planet for another 3, 4, 5 decades, hopefully. So
good stuff. Spawn 350 comes into I suppose a pop culture landscape, a comic book marketplace, which I find is difficult to define. You've got the Marvel movies, as you know, the bubble seems to have burst there. You've got a DC kind of in its third iteration of movies. Obviously, we've got the much talked about Spawn movie. What's your take on, firstly, the comic book industry at this time, and sort of Spawn's place in the industry?
I think the industry is sort of about where I thought it would be. I mean, we here's the thing about all businesses, and I don't think the comic book industry is immune to it. Everybody was here, and then the pandemic came, and depending on what your occupation was, when the pandemic came, you only went in two directions. You either went up or down, right? So if you were in the rental car business, down. If you were in the cruise line business, down. If you were in the amusement park business, hotel business, restaurant business, down. Because those areas sort of got shut off, right? And what that means is that when you shut off certain avenues, it means that then the flow of traffic in real life, you just got to find another way of going there. When you turn off each one of those areas I just talked about, that means that was normally money that was being spent by people on a routine basis. They go on vacations, they go out to restaurants, they go out to bars, they go to conventions, they go to movies. All the stuff that they were just part of living got taken away, which meant then that money was now sitting there. And so they reallocated the money. And when they reallocated it to some of the places that went up. One of the areas that went up was collectibles across the board. Why? People were at home for 3 years, stuck. Just get on the internet, and you go, I got money. I got more money in my bank than I normally have, because why? I can't spend it in these routine ways that I used to for decades. So maybe instead of buying 5 comic books, I'll buy 10. Maybe instead of only buying, the $10 toy or $20 toy, maybe I'll splurge on that one I've had my eye on that's $50, or I'll buy two, right? So everything in the collectible market went up, not just comic books, everything went up. I during that time, I cautioned my own employees and other peers that I had that this is a false positive. It's that money's just been reallocated. And as soon as they can start flying again, a plane ticket's $300. That means that's $300 less that they get to spend over here, whether it was on clothes or electronics or geek stuff. It's going to shrink back down. The question is, if we do our job right, can we say that we were here pre-pandemic, we jumped up to a false positive, but when we come back down, we're a little bit higher. We were here pre, can we be here post-pandemic? And that's where we're at, right? The problem is that some of the people who got 3 years up here, they got a little bit too used to it, right? Instead of calling it gravy on the potatoes, they thought it was the potatoes, right? So I didn't. I was like going, all right, don't know how long this is going to last, but we'll take it. And so now we come down, but the sales of the books, at least, sort of on an image end, and mine specifically, is that they came down, but there was a new floor, and you raised the floor, and now maybe this is the floor. So now you're constantly trying to raise the business floor of what you can expect from the audience, and then every day you're trying to figure out how to expand it. And again, if a movie comes along, that's going to be a huge lift to the word Spawn on a global level. And it should, given the snowball effect, help the comic books. And we have data. Almost every single comic book that's gone out in the last 5, 8, 10 years that has done anything meaningful is always put a bump in the comic books, and sometimes way more than a bump. It's actually skyrocket them, right? Walking Dead and Invincibles are two prime examples. So, and I'm going to assume that Marvel got a bump on some of their Avenger books and some of their Spider-Man books when some of those movies came out too.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you quite often see the shift between an interest in independent books and then back to company books. But I think over the last 15, 20 years, and of course you'll know the data to support this better than I would, the shift didn't really feel like it swung back to the company books. It's actually very much more towards the independent stuff, the image books, that kind of stuff, and that interest has been maintained. And I think sort of retailers certainly. Yeah,
I think overall in fandom, Russell, that I don't think people are worried so much about whether it's. I mean, I know there's people who only buy certain brands, right? I'm just Marvel, screw DC. I like DC, forget Marvel, whatever, and whatever. I think people are just looking for quality, right? Especially if you get a little bit older, and your sort of entertainment palette gets a little more sophisticated with age. You're just looking for a variety of stuff. And I think that on the independent side, and Image Comics in particular, we offer a pretty eclectic sort of buffet of options for readers. So if you want superheroes, we've got some, Spawn being one of them. And if you want, sort of just down to earth, gritty stuff, we got plenty of those. If you want biopics, if you want romance, you want comedy, like there's almost nothing we don't have coming out of Image comic books that I think that couldn't appeal to anybody that's over the age of 15, 16 that is saying, I still like superheroes. I'm not saying that people as you get older are going to walk away from superheroes. They just might not want a 100% steady diet of it like we used to have when we were collecting at 8 and 10 and 12 years old, right? We could live with that, right? Just like when we were kids, pizza and cheeseburgers, right? We could eat that every day like a dog, right? And then you get a little bit older and you're going, hey, I don't mind sampling different kinds of food. I think entertainment, and that's a big word, entertainment, and comic book falls underneath that. I think people just want a little bit of variety. And so I don't think when they're looking at Walking Dead, anybody's saying, oh man, it's an independent comic book. They're just going, it's a cool comic book. I dig it. Done. I don't really even care who publishes it to some extent.
And it's interesting you say that, because when I think of Spawn, I think of a comic book that's been so many different genres, from straight up superhero book to out and out horror, to mystery, suspense, all those kind of things. Would you say that's part of what's kept the interest from your side as the creator, as the writer of Spawn, being able to have a concept that was so versatile? And then was that part of your objective
yes.
from the outset?
Yes. I knew that if we try to do Marvel Light forever and we try to do DC Light, which is sort of what we did coming out of the gate, and we try to do that forever, then that's not a long term. I don't think that's long term success, because at some point people would just go, well, why don't I just go get, instead of Marvel Light, why don't I just go get Marvel? And if you can do DC Light, why don't I just go get DC? So I needed to create a character and an environment and a story, to your point, that did have the flexibility to be able to move in and out and morph itself for two reasons. One, to keep hopefully the readers a little bit off balance, to go, man, what is this book? A little bit. And it's kind of cool. And he can sort of shift sort of almost genres. And I needed that for me because I've been with this book since the beginning, and I've been with the character since the beginning. And I would argue that other than, Dave Sim, who did his big long run on Cerebus, who went 300 issues, right? And again, there's, Eric Larson's been with the Savage Dragon, and Robert Kirkman and a couple other books got close to 200. But, you do 300 of anything, if it's just repetitive, then it's going to drive me crazy personally. So even if it's just selfish, I have to, like I've always said, if Stan Lee had stayed on Spider-Man 300 issues, 350 issues, I don't think it's the same Spider-Man as we have today, because he did his 30, 40, 50 issues. And then it was like, okay. And then somebody else came in and repeated what he did for 30, 40, 50 issues. And then they sort of got a little bit tired. And then somebody else came in and they repeated what those two guys repeated for 30, 40, 50 issues. And what ends up happening, you're now like hundreds and hundreds of issues into it, and there's a little bit of a repetition to it, right? Or familiarness to it, that you sort of know what you're going to kind of sort of get. I would argue that if Stan had stayed on Spider-Man, or somebody had stayed on Superman for 300 issues, 4 and 5, those characters would have evolved too. Good, bad, or indifferent. I'm not saying that those varieties and the evolution is necessarily better, but they would have, because it's the only way that I think it's hard for me to imagine that a creative person could just do the same thing for 30 years, like I've done, over and over, exactly the same. You get bored. So of course you would come up with ways to reinvent the way, which is why I alter the costume from time to time, so we don't have to draw the costume the same way. I alter some of the powers from time to time, so it's not always he can just use the same 5 steps to beat the bad guy. The characters coming in and out, you have to do all of that to maintain longevity. And then at that point, your value is the longevity. So where you said earlier, where's Spawn in the mythos of comic books? I think, and maybe I'm being egotistical here, I think he's with the big boys at this point. When you think of characters, I think he has to be part of the conversation, right? He's been around for most people's lives, and he's been there nonstop, and he's relevant, and he's just hopefully, in the future here in entertainment, he's even going to become even more relevant to people. And so people will go, oh, and hopefully when they're talking about comic books someday, they'll go, hey, Superman, Batman, Hulk, Iron Man, Spawn, Avengers, and they just sort of throw them into the bucket.
And I think you're right. I mean, I think I watched Ready Player One the other day, and there's Spawn,
right.
And there's an
in the front.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's an Instagram feed I follow called Spawn Archives. And he just digs through all the merchandise and the great stuff. You think, wow, yeah, I remember whatever it was, the baseball jacket from 1997 or whatever it might be. Yeah,
Yeah.
he's been
Although on that end, I've intentionally for the last 10, 15 years kept it tight.
Yeah.
Right. That I could have done way more than I've done, but I've intentionally kept it tight for the moment of, again, fingers crossed, the movie coming and being successful and breaking out. Right. Because then that's the moment where you can then quote unquote exploit your brand in a way that there's then the demand for it, which is different than just doing it because you can. So yes, there's sometimes I forget even some of the stuff that we've done. You're saying somebody puts in the Spawn Chronicles. I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. We did that. There could be easily double, triple that if I wanted. I just have intentionally not gone that far because I want there to be a pent up demand for it. Yeah. That people go, man, I love Spawn, and I just went to the movie, and I love it. And it's like, where's the T-shirt? How come we haven't seen any T-shirts? And poof, and then you come out, and it works, and it's successful, and you've built up the demand because you weren't supplying it to them so readily.
Yeah.
So, and the reason that Spawn was in the front of that running scene in Ready Player One is because when Spielberg was looking for some properties, he came to me pretty early in the game. I went, yeah, sure, cool, right? Because we had done a couple of things with some of his properties, so it was like, yeah, cool. And I knew him a little bit at that point, and I was like, yeah. And then when they asked, like, hey, what do we got to do and how do we make it? And I was like, yeah, it looks great. Keep going. I was, whatever you got to do, knock it out of the ballpark. I'm good. Love it. I love it. Which is different than if you're doing a corporate owned property. Mm-hmm. And so I think when they got to that movie, they just went, hey, we don't have all those other characters tied down and everybody's being really anal about their notes. Todd's not. So put him in the front and give him the big cape and he will block half of them just because we don't have the approvals from head to toe on some of the other ones. And Todd approved us 7 months ago. Fine, at some point, being the easiest guy to deal with actually can score you brownie points. I had no idea he was going to be in front. I thought he was going to be in a crowd scene. I was going to have to squint, right? And then somebody went and saw it before I did, and they were going, oh my gosh, Todd. And I went, what? They put Spawn in front? Thank you, Stephen. So, but I think it was just because I made it easier for them too.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of T-shirts, and it's funny you mentioned that, I was desperately trying to find, I thought there must be a current Spawn T-shirt. I think I'd seen you wearing one in an interview with the kind of circular Spawn logo. And of course, like you just said, there's not been one for a long time. And I thought, well, is Todd's T-shirt 30 years old? And of course, it's Todd. He can make his own T-shirts. I think
that one that I wear all the time, I think it's based on the 25th anniversary. And we just celebrated the 30th. And I think we're now at 32. So so those shirts are at least 7 years old. So.
So yeah, the day that those shirts and a classic Spawn poster with your art or Greg Capullo's art, something like that, comes back out again, that will be a great day because I'll be getting one.
Look, there will be. Here's the thing, Russell. Here's the thing that I'm hoping, fingers crossed, some of my peers will pay attention to, is that because Robert Kirkman basically wrote the playbook on it, that he had an idea, he owned it himself. He went and helped exploit it outside of the bubble. And the bubble is basically comic books in our industry. You got outside the bubble, right? Which is a bit of a trick itself. Because once you get outside the bubble, if you can get people who don't collect comic books to know what your property is, that's impressive, right? Ask your mom who the Incredible Hulk is. She probably knows. I bet she's never bought an Incredible Hulk book, right? So attrition in the right places matter, right? I keep saying, I know there's these people called the Kardashians. I've never, ever looked them up or done any kind of search for them or anything, but I know they exist because they're just always there. So attrition matters. If you can get out of the bubble and then just beat people with it. So Walking Dead ends up working, but here's what Robert Kirkman had that some of them are missing, and it's a big miss. He had 120 issues about at the time when it really blew up to exploit. 120. And then now he's got 190. right? I've got 350. If Spawn decides he wants to become a movie that people care about across this globe, don't worry about me, Russell. I've got plenty in the vault to play with. What my peers are missing is that they're doing 5 or 6 issues, and then they're selling it into Hollywood, and they're hoping it becomes the next Walking Dead.
Right.
And if it does, and I hope it does for them, because it's all good things are good for comic books, they're only going to have 5 issues to exploit. So who do you think is going to do better? The guy who had 190 issues with The Walking Dead, or the guy who had 350 issues, or the guy who had 5?
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
Each one of those issues is just another life preserver, right? Who do you think's going to not drown, right? So if you want, you're going to have to give your rights away, and they're not going to make you rich if you make your first Hollywood deal, right? Ask Robert Kirkman, right? They didn't pay him a lot on Walking Dead at the beginning, right? Again, later on, I'm sure they did. I don't know, but not at the beginning. His real value was he retained the rights to his comic books and was able to exploit his own brand on the comic book front that he owned. But he had 120 and at the end 190 issues to play with. If you've only got 4 issues and you sell it into Hollywood and they make it and it becomes the next biggest, hottest thing across the globe, you don't even have 1 trade paperback.
No.
Forget a hardcover. Forget a compendium. That's 50 issues, right? You're not even close. You get to exploit 4 or 5 issues. Big deal. Big deal. So if you're trying to get rich, that's not the way to get rich.
No.
And anyways, I don't.
Do you think that there's been a shift? I mean, there was definitely a period where a lot of writers, especially who made their name at Marvel and DC, moved across to independent comics. And certainly the feeling from my side as a fan, as a reader, was a lot of people did that because they were chasing Hollywood deals. Do you see the trend changing there at all, based on what you've just said? The fact that they've gone off, they've done 6 issues of a independent book, sold it to Hollywood, and actually.
So here's what I'll say. Anytime an individual creator gets to make the decision on their creation, that's a victory. For me, that's a victory. That's what Image was sort of built upon, that concept. You created it, you own it, you make the decision. That's a victory. Now, we can have a second conversation. Do you think that the decisions that they made were the proper ones? That's where the debate comes, right? We give, since we don't own anything, we give 100% of the rope to the creative people. And I've seen people use that rope in a very positive way, and I've seen people strangle themselves with it. So it's too much freedom sometimes for people. So, okay, cool. But it's their life. So if they want to make a t-shirt, God bless them. If they don't, who cares, right? Like, to me, I'm not here to tell any creative person how to live their life. They get to do that. I'm only saying what I just said earlier. If you want to be the next Robert Kirkman, you're not playing the game right. If you want to get a Hollywood deal, yes, you're doing it right. If you want to do something that might turn into the next Walking Dead, yes, selling into Hollywood and cross your fingers. Yes. But if you want to be the next Robert Kirkman, who was able to reap the benefits of his hard work at the same time as the celebrity and the success came, then I think you're playing the game wrong. And the way to play the game right, get 50 issues out of your book. Why? Like, you did 50 issues of Thor. You did 50 issues of Spider-Man, Batman, whatever, Wonder Woman. It's weird how you can do it so easily and readily for another company. And you're a writer who does 4 books a month. Well, if you could do 3 books for the other guys, 50 of those, why wasn't one of the 4 you did for yourself 50 times? It's weird to me.
Yeah.
And the answer is sometimes they actually have done 50. It's just that they've done 50, but it's 10 different ideas of 5. And again, let them live the way they want. But if at their core, you want the success and the esteem of Robert Kirkman, and I know they do, a lot of them, they won't say it in those words, but I know they do, that's the goal, then it seems funny to me that you're not using the blueprint to get there. And the blueprint to get there is to keep putting out your book until you've got a stack of them and it becomes meaningful. So when it takes off, you've got a lot to exploit. I don't know. So, but and if Spawn does any real business, then I'll be taken from Robert's playbook also, because I've got 350 issues to play with. Like, yes, and then there'll be another example of why it matters to do a book past it. But I get it. It's hard. Doing 50 issues is hard, and that every issue isn't going to be a #1 bestseller, right? But every now and then you get to come to the forefront, like with Spawn 350, and say, hey, look at me. I'm still here. I'm relevant. Take a look. I wasn't doing that. I wasn't trying to get press with issue 341, because it's like, no, now's not the time. But I go, I'm going to build towards something, and then I'm going to remind them that I exist. And then you stay relevant, and then you go again, and then you try it again, and you try it again. I don't know. Like, there's no shortcut. Let me just say, I guess that's it, Russell. I at times it looks like they're trying to take shortcuts to get the same result that some of us have gotten by just long decades of hard work. There's no shortcut. I don't know what it is. I'd be doing it myself.
When we first spoke, which I think must have been 20 years ago, yeah, pretty much 21 years ago, we talked about toys, and we'll talk a little bit about toys now. And you said to me, when I asked you kind of, what different toys would you like to work with? You said, I'd love to do one G.I. Joe, one Transformer. I'd like to have a go at Star Wars. And just very recently,
one of everything.
Yeah. You just like to put your stamp on those different things. And just very recently, we've seen with Page Punchers, G.I. Joe, and Transformers, which is quite amazing, given that we're talking sort of Hasbro Properties, a toy company, working with another toy company, McFarlane Toys.
Yep.
What's the evolution of that? Do you think that could lead to more kind of G.I. Joe Transformers? Because obviously we've got the Page Puncher format. I'm a huge G.I. Joe fan, so that's kind of why I'm asking.
Possibly. Every corporation has their own agendas. I try not to mix corporations up. I try to remind my employees that think of them each as a child, that like they each have their own personalities and they each have their own traits, and don't try and compare your children to each other. So whatever one big giant corporation is doing, I don't assume that the others are doing it. I mean, if they have huge success, then yes, a lot of times people will try to copy. So we'll see. I mean, it's a sort of a baby step. I mean, we're just doing sort of the small figures to begin with. Mm-hmm. We'll see how it goes. And if that success hopefully leads to other opportunities and we can do and extrapolate more out of it, cool. Then maybe we get to do more in the brands that we already have, or maybe it sends a signal to other people when we go and talk to them that we could maybe do a weird sort of hybrid partnership with them. Results, everything is results driven, especially when you're dealing with public companies, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, you just have to have success, right? And that's the piece that at times I think that the sort of the consumer, the fan, the reader don't really sort of factor in that piece. You hear from time to time, so-and-so so successful, they're a sellout now, right? Oh man, look at that, and I've heard people say it about me. You're wrong. You're to some extent, you're dead wrong. I need success. I'm driven by success because success allows you the next opportunity. It opens up the next door. You go and have failure. You try it your way. You try and have failure and then see how many opportunities come after that, right? People open doors to people who have a winning story, not a losing story. So why do we need to be successful? So that we can open up another door artistically. That's it. So that's the drive, not because I want to be rich and famous, but unfortunately or fortunately, depending where you're standing, if you have success, usually the byproduct of some of that success is a little bit of fame and fortune, right? That's the trickle down of that. But if you don't use that, for me, as being the driver, right? You just do something. I've seen people before. They go, man, I want to drive a Lamborghini. Man, you know what? Maybe I should be a doctor. They don't really care about being a doctor. They just want a Lamborghini. So they're reverse engineering into it, where somebody else can say, hey, I want to, come up with this idea, this new design of something, and people strike to it, and they're like, oh man, I thought I was only going to sell 100. I sold 500,000. And then they get money. The money is a byproduct of a good idea. So
you have the record-breaking crowd-funded toy, I believe, with the Spawn Kickstarter. And I think a few months ago you teased the next crowdfunding project. Is there any sort of development on when we might see that go out and become a bit more public?
Yeah, we're actually having a meeting, I think, in an hour or two about that exact subject. Okay. So we're getting to the finish line of that. That one, Russell, is just taking a little bit more time because I wanted to develop as much as I could and compress as much time behind the scenes as possible. I'm spending money on it right now already, which is sort of not how Kickstarter works. You put it out, you hope you get the money, and then you then take the money and you go and build it. Mm-hmm. I actually want to spend my money in advance, get everything prepped, right? Get all the ingredients, turn on the oven, make sure that it's preheated. And then the only question is that the factories on the last day of the campaign will say, how many do you need?
Yeah.
We're ready. The oven is ready to go. How many cookies do you want us to bake? We've got all the ingredients. Let's go. Tell me how many cookies you want. And then if we do it that way, then historically what takes sometimes 9 months to 2 years, 3 years, I've heard sometimes on Kickstarter, I should be able to cut it down to 90 days.
Wow.
Like you bought it, it's coming. It's going to be on the water shipping, because if I do my job right, literally within days, I should be in production. Why? Because I've set all those pieces up, and I just need the final answer of how many do I need to make of each one of these.
Excellent. We shall look forward to that.
I'm hoping besides you get a good product at a fair price, I'm hoping you're going, wow, and I'm going to get it super fast. Yep. I'm gonna show people that there's a way to do that, but it's sort of weird people like me who aren't using the platform the same way as most people. I'm not using it to get the money. No. So I'll spend the money first. So.
And I guess the success of the first time round offers some reassurance that maybe it's a slightly reduced risk than if you were doing that.
Yeah, there was no right. I could have done. In hindsight, I should have done the same in the first one. There was not going to be any risk on it, right? Yeah, no, and this one for sure. But I think it will be part of the sell also, right? I will get this toy to you in record time, right? Cool. So that will be part of the promise. So,
and last question, because I appreciate you've got meetings to go to. What are you looking forward to about Spawn issue 400? So 50
wow.
issues time.
That's 4.5 years from now, and I don't even think 4.5 days in advance, right? So, I like 350 is in the can, and I've got our new books that are coming out. The first of which is going to be Sam and Twitch, the detective book. And so in the next week, I'm just going to be concentrating on that, and I'll worry about the week after that when that time comes. So there's too many intangibles between now and then, Russell. Between 350 and 400, there's still a lot of things that can change, both in the comic industry with the character and in the world. Because by 400, there should be 1 or 2 Spawn movies out by that point. And how does that change the mindset of like the stories that I'm telling? I don't know. We'll see.
Okay. Can we look forward to any movie news on the horizon? I appreciate these things come through.
This year, this year for sure. Yeah. This year, and the only reason I'm being that wide is because the writer that I deal with most of the time, guy by the name of Scott Silver, a hell of a writer, good man too. He's the one that co-wrote Joker 1, Joker 2, right? I believe Joker 2 will be possibly, if not for like it, I think it's possible Joker 2 could be the biggest movie of 2024. And I'm talking in terms of gross dollars, right? Could be the biggest movie of the year. It comes out in October, and if that's true, what I just said, or if it's anywhere close to being true, then the people involved with Joker 2 are going to be in high demand. And so one of them will be, well, what about the writer? What about the writer? And the writer is going to say, I mean, and if it's tracking to make $1 billion, like a second time, I don't know if it will, but Oppenheimer got there. And oh, by the way, so did Joker 1 did. Mm-hmm. So if it got anywhere close, but I mean, I'd be the biggest cheerleader. If it got past $1 billion a second time, Scott Silver, the writer, becomes one of 2 human beings on the planet to have written more than one movie that made over $1 billion. The other guy's name is James Cameron. He'll be one of 2 human beings. And his both were R-rated, which is a steep hill. So Hollywood is very repetitive in when they see success. And I think the 2 big movies coming out are going to be Deadpool and then Joker 2, and those are both R-rated movies. And if they both do the business I think they're going to both do, then Hollywood's going to go, oh my God, we got to do superhero, dark, gritty, R-rated movie. This is how we make money. I mean, they're just going to do that. I like set your clock. And if they do that, they're going to be asking the people who worked on those movies, and in particular, the latest one would, at that point in October, would be Joker 2, saying, hey, writer on Joker 2, what else are you doing? And he's going to hold up a script, and it's going to have the word Spawn on it. And everybody in that town should be chasing his tail at that point. So I don't know. We're having those conversations. Even if we've got the script, when do we go into the city and offer it? Do we go pre-Joker 2 or post-Joker 2? So that'll be determined by the group, right? A little bit of group think and how everybody feels. But like something's going to happen. Something's going to happen this year. It's just a matter of like when we decide to take it in. We'll get our answer. We're going to get our answer one way or the other for sure. And here we go. So I'll get back to you, right? Maybe we'll decide to go out 4 months earlier and go into summer. Okay, then the news will come sooner than that. But it's gonna happen. The big news, which would be we've made our deal, we've got our money, we're ready, and we're going into production ASAP. That's the next piece, and it's coming. So.
It's funny that you say, they see the success of something dark, gritty. Let's find more dark and gritty superhero movies. Going back in time to the 90s, you had dark and gritty Batman, and then 5, 6, 7 years later, the same thing was happening, and what we had was the Spawn movie. So it's interesting seeing that kind of cycle repeat itself and coming back around.
Yeah, but the Spawn movie, if you remember, was PG-13, right? The HBO show was R-rated.
Yeah.
And in tonality, I think the HBO show is way closer to what we're trying to do, right? I mean, Deadpool is R for different reasons than why Joker's are, right? And why Spawn will be R. You know, we're tackling serious sort of points of looking at the world and concepts, and it's not about cursing that can get you to R real fast. So, but we'll see. Like I said, it's hard for me to imagine that something meaningful doesn't occur this year. It would be shocking. It would be shocking to me.
On that note, sir, I will let you get on with your busy day. Congratulations on Spawn 350. We spoke at 300. We're talking at 350, so I will look forward to. Hopefully, we'll speak before issue 400, but I will look forward to speaking to you about issue 400. Continue success.
And as you mentioned before, we're also celebrating the 30th anniversary of our toy company. So right? we got a couple things happening, and with that year-long celebration, and with moving forward with Spawn and introducing the new stuff, and then hopefully coming in with some big news finally for all of us on the movie front, then it should be a pretty grand year. So
the year of Spawn.